Good evening from India. Jai Hind and welcome to each and every one of you. It's a great pleasure being together on this webinar. We have a number of friends from abroad and of course from India too. It's a very apt and a contemporary topic we have today, cyber information warfare. I must thank General Ravi Arora, who's the Distinguished Fellow, Center for Joint Warfare Studies, New Delhi, and the editor IMR for having put this together, for having conceptualized this, and for the conduct of this. Thank you very much, sir. Also, Rashmi for the technical support. We have two sessions. We're starting now and we'll finish at 8:30 p.m. India time, 2030. And we have two sessions. The first session is identifying threats and defining actors. And for this, we have four speakers. The first is General G.D. Bakshi. He needs no introduction. He's a war veteran. Of course, we have fought a small war in Kargil together. In effect, he's an info warrior. He's often seen on the media, the television. He speaks extremely well. And he has about 100,000 Facebook followers. So he is an influencer of his own. He's an author of many books. Actually, over 25 books. And he'll be speaking to us on conventional information warfare and transformation to cyber information warfare. The next speaker, we have Dr. David Otto. Thank you for sparing your time. He's an expert in geopolitics dynamics between the West, Middle East, and Africa. He's an expert consultant for the governments and NGOs, including UN, NATO, the US Department of Defense. He'll be speaking to us on hybrid terrorism, a very interesting subject, and he's an expert on this. The fourth speaker for this session is Professor Isaac Ben Israel from Tel Aviv University. He's the chairman of the Israeli Space Center. He heads the Balvetnik Interdisciplinary Cyber Studies Center at Tel Aviv. Thank you very much for joining us. He'll be speaking to us on cyber information, a threat to democracies, which is a very interesting subject, India being the largest and one of the most vibrant democracies. We also have a number of, each one of you is very important, but I would like to make a special mention of some of my more respected people out here. We have General Rajesh Pant. He's the National Cyber Security Coordinator. Thank you, sir, for joining. We have General Banki Patil, a very regarded and respected senior colleague. We always looked up to him. Thank you, sir, for joining. General Iyengar, he's an expert. He's written a couple of books on this. He's written on social media recently. Thank you very much for joining, sir. We also have General Chacha and General Maro from Army Commanders. We have friends from foreign countries. Sorry, I cannot name everyone, but thank you very much for joining us. In the second session, we have another IW expert, General Satish Dua. He's a former chief of the Integrated Defense Staff, and he'll be taking on the second session. And in that session, we have Dr. Daniel Cohen, General Bipin Bakshi, and Ms. Snehshri Mukherjee speaking to us. So I will just take this opportunity to thank each one of the people out here and set the stage for the discussions. I will be speaking in the Indian context mainly, as the topic says, Indian context. In India, we have a little over 525 million internet users. We have 450 million smartphone users. India also has 346 million Facebook users. Another 400 million WhatsApp users. We send more than 1 million good morning messages every day. We have 120 million or TikTok users. We had TikTok users till TikTok was banned last month. We have 60 million Instagram users. We also have 37 million LinkedIn users and 23 million Twitter users. And we have, of course, Mr. Vinod Goenka out here, who's been waging a war against a single-handed war against Twitter for the anti-national activities being put on the Twitter by certain people. Thank you very much. And he's also written a book on data sovereignty, which I was fortunate enough to co-author, and so was General Patil. Today we live in an interconnected network world. The information domain is exceedingly important. Linear wars will continue to be linear wars as we have known them, but tomorrow's new age warfare is all about multi-domain warfare, and in the multi-domain warfare, information wars are exceedingly important. I just have two small points, and thereafter I leave it to the experts. The first is, we live in what we call presentism and recentism. We live today with the PLA carrying out certain transgressions along the line of action control. They have shattered the peace and tranquility which existed for 4.5 decades. That is on the line of actual control. But more importantly, they've also taken to information warfare. What I say, they carry out a three-pronged strategy. One is wolf diplomacy, the second is the debt trap, and third is the military coercive strategy. But all these three approaches are backed by the three warfare strategy, of which information warfare, public opinion, psychological ops, and legal warfare are an exceedingly integral part of this warfare. And that is what China has been doing, carrying out a very, in the cyber domain, that is, and they have nearly 1 million cyber warriors all over. And even the CENJOWS Center of John Boffa study, the site has been attacked. I hope China has not done it, but let's see who's done it. But the indicators that they have been threatened and attacked by Chinese users. So to make my point, the information domain is can sway decision making at the highest levels. So that is where the information domain comes into being. It can force, especially in the democracies like India, it can force the political leadership to take decisions at an early stage, which may not like for public, to assert the public sentiment. So information domain is exceedingly important. The next point is a little, we had in February of last year, and we had an unfortunate terrorist attack in Pulwama where we lost 44 soldiers from the Central Reserve Police Force. And after that, on the 26th of February, we had precision airstrikes on a terrorist camp at Jabba Top. Why I say that is, today, most of us out here call this the Balakot strikes. No, it is not Balakot strike. It is the strike on the Jabba Top, which is a known terrorist camp. But the narrative was hijacked by the DG ISPR early in the morning of the 27th at 5:30 in the morning. I was doing a golf that day. When I got up, I saw the tweet, and there were just 4 likes out there that time. And it said, the Indian Air Force aircraft have attacked Balakot. Now, Balakot is also, my first reaction was Balakot is somewhere in the Rajouri sector where I've been deployed earlier. And I did not realize that it was Jabba Top. And then today also, each one of us in India also, we call the airstrikes on Balakot. Now, that was something what the information war has done. That was the information war by the DG ISPR, which is carried out exceedingly well. We lost the centrality of Pulwama. We lost the centrality of Pulwama, which was just at Belém to India, to go and strike at Jabba Top, which is a terrorist training camp of the LET. So that's what it is. The complete narrative was hijacked. And that day morning, and I've been told by none other than people who were present in Islamabad that day, that the defense attaches at 9:30 on 27th February morning were put in helicopters to be taken to Balakot to say that no damage had been done. But when the rotors had started in the helicopters, they were told that the airspace is closed. And we know that 27th, what the Pakistan Air Force called Operation Swift Retort, and that look at the way the whole thing was managed. It is the information domain where Jabba Top became Balakot, which is about 25 kilometers away from Jabba Top, and 25 kilometers, as most of we know in the Air Force, especially, is a lot of error. It doesn't normally happen. And so that is where I say the centrality was taken. Unlike Uri, when Uri happened, the centrality of Uri remained. Uri was just at Belém. So we have to understand that information domain is exceedingly important. And the aim behind these attacks, whether surgical strikes or precision attacks, was to raise the cost for Pakistan, to ensure that Pakistan changes its behavior in the long term. But after this, the Pakistan actually came out believing in their own superiority in the public domain, not actually in the military domain. So that is what I'm trying to say. It is exceedingly important, the information war. And thank you. This cyber war is the platform in which the information war are going to be waged in future. Whatever we do, it is extremely important. Why do nations go to war, actually? That's the last point I had. Nations go to war to impose their will on their adversary. That's the ultimate aim. War is not an option. War is not a last resort. But as a last resort, the nations want to impose their will onto their adversaries. But today, with the information domain, you don't need to go to war. You can, in the information domain, you can actually change the behavior of individual, change the behavior of society, change the behavior of people. We know what COVID-19 has done. So the information domain, I think, has become more important than any other domain of warfare. With this, I will hand over the subject to Judy Bakshi. Sir, all yours to take on from here. I'll request the 4 speakers to stick to the 10 minutes. We have to finish by 8:30, and I cannot let Jan Dua start late. He's very sticky about time. Over to you, and thank you very much. May I request Dr. David Otto to please give his views on the geopolitical dynamics on the hybrid terrorism, sorry. Doctor,
thank you very much again for that introduction, gentlemen. But I just want to really appreciate the audience for their patience and for this time. But first of all, I want to say thank you to the Centre and to the IMR for inviting me to discuss hybrid terrorism and key operations theater in terrorism. Again, I appreciate the fact that we are in very, very different times in the history of insurgencies, in the history of terrorism, but also in the history of cyber warfare. And that is why I thought that the most important thing for us to start this discussion with is to first of all, give you what today's outcome is going to be about. But before I do that, I would introduce myself. I'm David Otto. I am the director for Global Risks International. I'm also the director for Counter-terrorism and Organized Crime for an organization called Step In, Step Out. I do a lot of consultancy for NATO forces, for the US AFRICOM, on defense against terrorism. I'm also a consultant and one of the experts that designed the Interpol global counterterrorism strategy. And one of the things that we looked at in 2016 when we engaged in this discipline was to emphasize the role of hybrid terrorism, which is, when I say hybrid terrorism, I mean terrorism that takes place online, but also terrorism that takes place offline. So the first thing that we really want to get the audience to understand is we're looking at practicalities, but we don't have enough time on this session. We just have 10 minutes. And of course, 10 minutes is not enough for me to give you as much information as I can give you. But I'll just give you a little bit of a framework in terms of how you can approach these things and approach the topic of cyber and hybrid terrorism from your own perspective. First of all, I'll look at what I call the triangle session. The triangle session simply says that in order for you to address a particular issue, you must have sufficient knowledge of the subject matter. So if you're talking about cyber terrorism, you must be able to have sufficient knowledge about it. Now, if you have sufficient knowledge, that permits you to be able to take some responsibility. And the level of responsibility that you can take as a frontline practitioner will enable you to be able to control a situation, which we call situational control. So we always have this discussion when we have a session of this nature. Let people understand that you need your knowledge of the subject matter, one. Number two, that knowledge enables you to be able to take your responsibility. And then, of course, for you to be able to control the situation in front of you. So that is the fundamental which we would end up talking about within this session. But more importantly, I have designed what I call the triangular methodology of terrorism and hybrid terrorism. So that triangular methodology is important. Whether you're talking about hybrid terrorism or you're talking about online terrorism or cyber terrorism, then or conventional warfare, you've got to make sure that you understand the triangular methodology. Now, the triangular methodology, gentlemen, I think I couldn't be able to share my screen, but what I would do is I would give these PowerPoints and they can present it to you if you need it. Now, the triangular methodology allows you to understand the motivation and the ideology behind cyber terrorism, whether it is a criminal ideology, whether it is a terrorism nature of ideology. you've got to understand the motivation behind that. Then another thing which you have to understand is, what we call the capacity. So what kind of capacity do terrorist organizations use in order for them to be able to launch a cyber attack? What kind of capacity would they use to launch a hybrid attack? So, and then you've got to understand that. But then understand the last point, which is the target. So, a criminal organization or a terrorist organizations will always have the motivation, then they would have the capacity, and then they would have their targets. But it is not a straight line methodology, in the sense that sometimes the level of capacity that a terrorist organization would decide to have will be dependent on the nature of the target. But also, it will be also dependent on the motivational factors. So I think that's important. Now, let's come to what hybrid terrorism is all about. And what I want the audience to really focus about after I give a definition is that, I want you to focus about hybrid terrorism in the sense of activities. So where does it take place? Where does hybrid terrorism take place? And it takes place in two areas, and which is the online and the offline platform. When I say offline, I mean, you carry out planning online and then you move towards the, maybe to the streets, maybe to an area which is a lot more of a physical space. Now, the way that I defined hybrid terrorism, taking into context that the definition of terrorism is always an academic endeavor, which is not necessarily my thing. I believe in practicalities. So when I talk about hybrid terrorism, I talk about where it is planned. So the planning takes place online. The preparation, where does it take place? The execution, where does it take place? So for me, hybrid terrorism is all about looking at the planning, the preparation, the execution of an act of terrorism using your online and your offline platforms to directly or indirectly achieve ideological or operational goals. So the point which is very important here is for the audience to understand your threats, know who your threats are, because once you understand your threats, it's easier for you to be able to, to be able to address these issues. Now, once you understand your threats, I always say to countries that I give these projects to, these programs to always build what I call your national intelligence estimate of threats. So your national intelligence estimate of threats is to make sure that you can be able to measure the threats that are faced by your state. So, for example, if it's India, what are your threats? What are your internal threats? What are your external threats? How can you identify your adversaries? How can you understand where your adversaries are operating within? Are they operating within the online space? Are they operating within the offline space? Or it is a hybrid nature? And that is why I keep saying that this is all about understanding hybrid terrorism. Again, I think it's important for one more thing, for people to understand that another way of measuring your national intelligence estimate is for you to assess your internal and external vulnerabilities. Where are your weaknesses within your state? And how can you measure your prevention measures, your prevention capacity, your response capacity, your capacity to manage these online threats, these cyber threats? I think this is where you have to look at, because in order for you to do that, you will then come up with what I call an effective hybrid counter-terrorism response plan. And that is where you want to be as a state, understanding your national intelligence estimate threat and building them from that perspective. Then you move to what I describe as your order of battle, which of course looks at your logistics, it looks at your capacity, your strategy. Because once you understand your threats, you can determine your order of battle. You can understand how your threats are dependent on your vulnerabilities. What levels of personnel do you have, within your state? What kind of resources do you have? What is your political will to be able to address these issues? But more importantly, what is the capacity of your adversary? Does your adversary have a capacity which is a lot more, powerful than your own capacity? So you've got to be able to understand your threat response plan from this perspective. You design your prevention measures for cyber terrorism, for hybrid terrorism. You design your response method. You design your management of your order of battle. And then you look at them from what I call the immediate, the short-term, the long-term measures, and of course your review and monitoring and evaluation plan. So again, I think that's very important. But when you're looking at cyber terrorism and you're looking at hybrid terrorism, which is, the two platforms, you've got to be able to understand as a nation or as a state how you can identify your enemies that operate online, how you can identify your enemies that operate online. You build what I call a threat spectrum, which is your level of threat. How do you measure, where is your cyber threat within your state? How much threat do you have from your cyberspace? How much threat do you have from your conventional war space? And then how much threat do you really have from your asymmetric war space? So once you have that threat spectrum, you can be able to determine whether your country is at a high risk, is at a medium risk, or is at a low risk, depending on the kind of threat that you're looking at. So one thing that we've seen is that the old days of conventional warfare, is gone. Not in the sense that you will not still have, countries attacking each other, but what you have today is an increase in asymmetric warfare. You've got terrorism, of course, which is one of them. You've got trade wars. Now you have what some experts define as biological warfare, which is which we see, in the sense of looking at the coronavirus, which is one of them. And then, of course, you have economic warfare and propaganda warfare. Those are some of the issues that we face now. But the biggest one is the cyber warfare, which, again, I've described it as a hybrid warfare, because it's not just cyber. It moves from the online space and then it demonstrates itself within the offline space. So we've got to understand how, different countries can be able to engage in these various measures using what I call the multi-agency approach of dealing with your hybrid warfare, within the space of online and within the space of online. You've got to be able to use all your sister agencies, coordinate and collaborate, to understand the dynamics of this space. So I think in terms of, the hybrid warfare and the time that we've been given, I think it's important that in order for the audience to really benefit from an effective solution to hybrid warfare, you need to be able to evaluate your personal challenges. Again, talk about your structural and technical capacities, and then you frame your practical methods and your practical tools within your state. Because for me, I believe in one thing and one thing only. If you fail to plan, then you're planning to fail. So when it comes to hybrid warfare, it is a challenge, but that challenge can be addressed if you can structure your national intelligence estimate within your state of concern. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you, Dr. David. Thank you very much. And if you plan to fail, you fail to plan. If you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I think it's very well summed up. And you have given us the hybrid-terrorism triangle and also external and internal vulnerabilities. You've spoken about our national intelligence estimate of threats and also the orbit of battle. Thank you very much indeed. Without taking much time, is General Bakshi, sir?
Yeah.
Okay, sir. So over to you, sir. 10 minutes, sir. Thank you much.
Thank you indeed. Gentlemen, I shall be actually spanning the historical perspective, and we shall talk about how information warfare graduated to cyber warfare. Now, as you are all aware, even the Second World War, the electronic tool at that time was the radio. We had transited from the print medium to the radio medium, and that was used for propaganda and psychological operations, info warfare operations of sort, in a very, very major way. The first major use, you could say, was in terms of when the Normandy landings Operation Neptune was launched, there was a major information warfare or a psychological warfare campaign to somehow carry out deception operations. Deception operations in terms of where exactly the landings were to be. They were to be at Normandy, the closest point, and yet we wanted to give an impression that they are going to be at Pas de Calais. So this was in terms of deception. There are two types of deception. One is the ambiguity increasing deception, where you generate a whole range of options. And one is that when you create one, option and its exact polar opposite, and then we try and one its exact polar opposite, and then we try and deceive the enemy, make him very certain and very wrong. This was successfully done, in Operation Neptune and the Normandy landings. Next, we also have examples there. In fact, you'll be quite surprised to hear that the entire North African campaign, as far as the Germans were concerned, was a deception operations to take the attention away from the invasion of Russia, which was the major operation where about 10 panzer divisions were going in. So with 1.5, one panzer and one light motorized division, Rommel was supposed to keep the Allies engaged this side. Even Operation Sea Lion, that was the so-called projected invasion of Great Britain, which never happened, was also information warfare or a deception operation in which the blitz, the air blitz was launched on London. Coming closer to our time, information warfare hit the limelight with the Gulf War, with the first Gulf War, when you know that the telematic medium was used for the first time to shape the global, the regional, and the local information warfare environment in a very, very major way by a grand telematic assault which brought the war to every drawing room in the world, via the CNN telematic blitz, if you may so call it. And, and it was able to shape attitudes, opinions, emotions, and ultimately the behavior of the target audiences which were involved in a 24/7 telematic assault. But the beginnings of the transition from info warfare to cyber warfare to the digitization of warfare to a revolution in military affairs, if you so would like to call it, had already started occurring in the first Gulf War. Don't forget that the CIA, there was a number of these computers which were being brought in for the Israeli air defense network. And the CIA had attacked these with with viruses, which completely disabled these computers, and as a result, the Iraqi SAM-2, SAM-6 missiles just could not operate. So you had already done the transition from information warfare to cyber warfare. Don't forget that the GPS was used in a big way. The digitization of war, your situational awareness. There was a transparency kind of a revolution with your satellites, which had made GPS application. There is the civil GPS application. There is the far more accurate and secure military GPS application. And the Hail Mary maneuver through southern Iraq utilized the GPS application in a very, very major way. And therefore, we see the beginning of the transition from information warfare to cyber warfare. And now you have your, cyber operations in a very, very major way. I'm right now confining myself more to the conventional war mode. And we have seen that when the Russians attacked Georgia, the first attack was a cyber attack, brute force attack, which brought down all their computer networks on which a state is normally dependent. You can snarl the traffic networks of the enemy. You can snarl his air defense network. You can launch an across-the-board attack on his information architecture, which would include his electrical grids, which would include his banking, which could include his stock markets, you can get the nation down. So you can now launch an across-the-board cyber warfare attacks, and you have so many means of creating a situational awareness, and a situational awareness of an order in which everything that moves will be detected, everything that is detected will be destroyed, because your architectures of battlefield information systems will reduce the loop between the shooter and the sensor, make it almost instantaneous. An example of this we saw in the Afghan war, when the Tamer laser sights were used by the American Special Forces. You just beamed it on your target, you read off the 8-figure grid reference, you beamed it up to the Warthog or to the ground attack aircraft or to your artillery, and within 5 to 6 minutes, that target was destroyed, ceased to exist. So now you're going to have these kind of computer vests on every soldier, where he will be a complete part of an battle information management system, where he is plugged in. He knows his 8-figure grid reference location. He knows where his compatriots are, his comrades are. He knows where the enemy is. He knows where his tanks are and his artillery is. He just uses that Tamer sight to home in onto your the enemy targets, that is beamed up straight away without any interface required to the combat aircraft or to your artillery systems to destroy those targets instantaneously. You have the AVAX for the air battle. You have the J-stars for the joint battle, the integrated land battle, in which you can pick up every single tank, where they are. Your situational awareness is of such a high order. And the whole aim of this information cyber warfare mix, that fifth generation of war, as some people like to call it, is that you are able to know more and more about the enemy and progressively let him know less and less about yourself, so that you shape the battle space and you utilize the digitization of the battle space occurs, because your situational awareness is through digitization. Your ability to close the sensor to shooter loop, the OODA loop as it is called, observation orientation decision action loops, are shortened, and instantaneously you can destroy. So whatever moves is detected, whatever is detected is destroyed. So even your space warfare now comes into this, because it is the satellites which are going to be up 24/7, the 24 satellites which run the GPS system. The Chinese have their own. We in India have gone in for our own Gagan system, etc., because you can easily, snarl the system at the time of battle for your adversary or for anybody else. You do not want to use their system. So you have to have your own systems. You cannot rely upon what is made available for civilian use on the battlefield. And then, of course, the attack, as I said, the Chinese, if a Chinese attack is going to come upon India, the first assault will be the cyber assault, a brute force attack, a viral attack, onto your computer systems, your battle management systems, your air defense systems, your command and control systems, with the aim to dislocate command and control warfare entirely. Your command and control means are either soft killed or hard killed, or rendered, dysfunctional by the use of viruses, Trojan horses, etc. Your entire computer.
I would request you to close the lines.
Yeah. So you see, what we are witnessing is actually a revolution, an RMA in military affairs, which has seen the transition from standard psychological operation, information warfare, to now cyber warfare, and the complete digitization of warfare. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for this historical perspective, especially. It's very interesting, actually. You covered the complete, not only historical perspective, the present, and also the future of cyber warfare in the information domain. The only thing is that, if you recollect, the first information warfare was carried out during Mahabharata, the 10th day, Ashwatthama. So this has been going on for ages. It is, I think, 6,000 years ago, when on the 10th day of Mahabharata, when Drona took over the supreme command after Bhishma was killed, Yudhishthira was told by Krishna to say that Ashwatthama is no more, and that is how Drona was destroyed. So I think this has information war is a very important domain. Dr. Arvind Gupta is the technical thing we corrected, Jan sir?
He's not yet ready.
Okay. Right. Then may I request Professor Isaac Ben Israel to please take on his brief, please. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Let me first introduce myself. I'm a retired general. I used to be the head of what in India you call DRDO, the parallel in Israel. We call it DRD, the Defense Research and Development Organization of the Ministry of Defense. This was in the 90s, so the whole 90s. At that time, the head of DRDO was the late Dr. Abdul Kalam. I became a friend of him, and he is one of the most impressive men I've ever met in my life. Nevertheless, what is more important is that in 91, 92, I was the first one in Israel who founded a unit which nowadays we may call an offensive cyber unit. At that time we used different names, but that tells you that I'm already 30 years or so involved in cyber warfare. I retired from the IDF, joined Tel Aviv University. Currently, I'm the head of the Cyber Research Center of Tel Aviv University. I founded it some 10 years ago. And I'm not related to this. I'm also the chairman, the president of Israeli Space Agency. Now, let me come back to the subject I was asked to talk about, and that is information warfare, especially as a threat to democracies. That is, using the cyber network, the social networks, in order to play with elections, etc. And as we all know, as was done a few years ago by Russia during the elections between President Trump and Hillary Clinton. I listened very carefully to the presentation of Bakshi, and I would say I agree with every word. Trying to influence or use information or disinformation, what we nowadays call fake news, is not a new phenomenon. It started maybe thousands of years ago by spreading rumors, etc. Only the tools today are different, and the tools many times make a lot of difference. Now, it is very important to understand how did the Russians influence the elections. It's not only by hacking into the computer of the Democratic Party of Hillary Clinton party, and not only by copying a lot of files, because this by itself cannot really have a lot of influence on the elections. What they did is they planted in this huge amount of data they stored, they planted inside some falsified, some fake files, which they carefully designed in order to show that Hillary has a lot of health problems, that she is connected somehow to corruption and certain issues that they selected. And they did it, and they took all this huge amount of data, including the fake files, and they sent it openly to the media in the US few days before the election, not so long before the election. Now, if you are a TV network or some newspaper, you don't have time to read all these huge amount of files. And of course, you don't have time to check every file there if it is reliable or not. So they use some agents in the USA which helped to sort the information in this huge amount of files that were released, and to point at certain files which usually the false files, the fake files, which connected Hillary, as I said, to health problems, corruption, etc. And this made a lot of influence on the voters. They didn't do it in every country, in every state, by the way. They chose those states in which the polls showed that the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans was small, because you cannot influence a lot of people. It is estimated that they changed the opinion of perhaps 2% of the voters. So they chose those states in which it was almost a balance between the two parties. And in those states, it was enough, given the electors system of the USA, the end result was that President Trump had more electors than his opponent. Now, it's very interesting to understand they try to do the same, more or less a year later, in the elections in France. And it's very interesting to understand why it succeeded in the USA and failed in France. Now, in France, it failed because, first of all, it was after the elections in the USA, so the French were aware that something like this can happen. And what they did, not yet President Macron, he appointed a young guy, his name is Munir Mahjoub, and this guy, he appointed him to be the head of his digital campaign. This was the official title. And he thought what he can do once he guessed the Russian will use the same technique as they used in the USA, and he found a very original solution. If you don't know about it, it will come to you as a surprise. What he did, he himself planted in his own computer, the computer of the Macron campaign, he himself implanted their fake files, not telling anyone that there are files like this, but very ridiculous one. I mean, he didn't put fake files which looked as if they were reliable and true, but one file saying that, for example, one file was written, he put Cyrillic alphabet, Russian alphabet on it in the comments, and you read it, you saw immediately that some Russian had messed with it. Another file telling that Macron is, have a tail. He had an operation in hospital to remove his tail. Few very ridiculous files like this. And as he suspected, 48 hours before the elections, the Russian again hacked into the computer of Macron's campaign and released to the press, to the media, a huge amount of files. And again, some agents, living agents, people, helped the media to find the right files that the Russian planted there. But what he did as a reaction was to point at those files that he himself planted there, without, of course, telling anyone that he planted it. And then the media saw that these are very ridiculous. They decided that this whole huge amount of data is not reliable and didn't publish it until after the elections. This is a very original solution. You can do it once. It's not so simple to repeat it. It tells you something about this type of warfare, trying to influence elections. Now, we in Israel, we thought about it, and we had, only in the last year, we had 3 campaigns, 3 consecutive elections, because no one won in the first 2. We thought about it, and we decided that we should take care of it. I mean, we created a new body which is monitoring this so-called social cyber or cyberspace, and trying to distinguish between fake news and real news. Now, of course, it is well known that now with this cyber technology, one can spread a lot of fake news very quickly and without any problem. But people tend to forget that many times by using certain simple algorithms like checking and comparing, etc., you can detect automatically by machines, not by human beings, automatically a suspicious fake news. And then it is enough to put aside it warning saying, beware, it is suspected as a fake news or something like this. And then it, of course, you cannot stop the spread of this fake post, etc. But by adding this warning, you may cause people to think twice and not to fall in the traps that the bad guys want them to fall in. But this is about the influencing the election. Let me tell you that in real democracies, I guess it's the same in India, it's not so easy really to influence people to change their votes. You can of course use fake news, and people are using fake news, but this, if you have enough time and you expose the fake news, something like this, people usually would not believe whatever they see or hear. We have today what we call deep fake, that is faking not written messages or something like this, but you see a video, you see someone is talking, you see the face, you see the voice, you know that this is the face and voice, let's say, of the president, someone like that, but it is fake. It is really an actor who say something, and the machine changed the face and the voice to copy it from someone which we all know and recognize. This deep fake is really a problem, but again, as I said, it's not an hopeless warfare, because you can use more or less the same techniques, the machine learning techniques that enable you to create those deep fake videos. You can use the same machine learning algorithms in order to detect very fast and distinguish between the deep fake videos and the real videos. Last point I would say, which is very important, maybe influencing people, information warfare. They are all done to something which is virtual. I mean, it's not a physical damage. It is damage to in the space of opinion, which sometimes related to knowledge, IP, etc. It has also a huge economic impacts. But really, what is frightening me personally, thinking about cyber warfare, is the physical damage. And it was already mentioned here that almost every critical infrastructure, every vital system that we use in our life is today in modern life, in modern countries, is controlled by computers, and one can use the same so-called cyber attacks to hack into the computer, not to change or steal the information, but in order to damage the control of vital systems like power production, water supply, healthcare machines, etc., and to cause a huge physical damage. This is much more frightening than what we call information warfare, without taking lightly this information warfare. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Thank you so much. It's been indeed very interesting and an education listening to you. I think the biggest threat which comes from information warfare in the cyber domain is a threat to democracies, because democracy is exceedingly important to us. It is part of what we say. We pride ourselves being the largest democracy. And if we find that someone is going to interfere with us, it is a possibility, though you assured us that India may not be so easily influenceable by information warfare, but the threat still remains. Usually, everything is virtual nowadays, especially after COVID-19. Things have become much faster. Like we are talking to each other in a virtual domain, virtual schools, virtual offices, virtual shopping is there, online, everything is online. I do feel that the virtual societal warfare happens to be the next big threat, and we need to be prepared for it. And thank you very much indeed. It's been a great learning. Although some of the figures which I got was there were 8 million Facebook users in the US who were influenced prior to the elections, the last elections. And so social media and cyber warfare is going to be an extremely important part. As President Trump himself says, I'm the Shakespeare of 140 characters. So that is the cyber domain and information war. Thank you very much. Yes, we'll take on the questions. We do have a few questions, but if anyone wants any more questions, go to the right, discuss, go to the audience and Q&A, and please give out the questions. You can also do it in the audience public domain. The first question we have is from do we need to redefine decisive victory in a conflict in an era where the perception of victory will be more important than a military victory in traditional sense? That's from Harbir Singh. Thank you very much. A lovely question, absolutely. That is the crunch issue. We also have another question. IW and technology go hand in hand. It's technology driven and akin to digital media manipulation. Are we not lagging behind in that? Also, there was another question on the wolf. I had seen it earlier somewhere. Let me just go back. Yes. How do you identify a lone wolf threat? Dr. David, can I ask you to take on this question? How do I
sorry,
a lone wolf threat? Yeah.
Yes, I didn't catch the last question. What did you say? What was the last question?
No, how do you identify a lone wolf threat?
Okay. Yes, of course. One of the main challenges of asymmetric warfare is to be able to identify who these perpetrators are at a time when they are still actually having the extremism ideology to the point at which you can actually stop them from acquiring some certain levels of capacity. So where they're going to buy their weapons from, how they make their IEDs, or how they select their targets. But I think the best way that you can use to identify not just a lone wolf threat, but a group threat, is to be able to win the hearts and minds of the local population, the places where these people always live in. They would always have people that they talk to. They would always have relatives that they will show them some signs of their activities. So I think it's important to always have the backing of the community, because terrorists, they live in the community. They need the community to survive. So if you can win the hearts and minds of the local communities where these people live in, that is your best way of having information. And that information can then be analyzed to intelligence that will lead you to identify a lone threat. It's as simple as that. It's all about you being able to understand first of all, the platforms under which these people operate. Now, if they operate exclusively online, then you can always identify them by the kind of information that they put out. You can look at various algorithms of, their activities, and then you can then deploy your intelligence units to verify these lone wolves. Yeah, that's my answer to that.
Thank you very much. I think it's a very elaborate answer. Next, we have a question on information warfare technology go hand in hand. I think I'll take another question which comes before that, and it's a very interesting one. Do we need to redefine decisive victory in a conflict in an era where the perception of victory will be more important than a military victory in traditions? And I think I do agree with that. The perception of victory is more important. General Bakshi, would you like to take this answer?
Most certainly. The Second World War, when the operations were absolutely kinetic, there was this thing of unconditional surrender, as the end state that you would wish to enforce. Now, this kind of an unconditional surrender has now become part of history. More or less, the last that we have seen it is a partial such thing. Of course, I again go back to the Gulf War I. But let me also go back to 1971 war, when at least in the Eastern Theater, we were able to enforce a state in which it was more or less unconditional surrender. But by and large, it has become so ambiguous because of the limitations imposed by, let us say, when both sides are nuclear. So you cannot go for an end state in which the other side is pushed beyond the nuclear Rubicon and he uses his nuclear weapons. So how do you then decide what is a desirable end state without crossing the thresholds? Let me go to the Kargil war is one of the best examples. So within the limitations of that war, we very clearly decided that we would confine the war to our own side of the territory, right? And that within that we would use kinetic assaults. We backed each battalion attack with 120 120 medium and heavy guns and the multi-barrel rocket launchers. We pushed him out yard by yard, forced him to evict from our territory. And that was victory. That itself was victory, that how India had shown restraint and shown maturity and wisdom in a condition of a nuclear backdrop, where Pakistan had acted in a very irrational, hubris kind of a manner as a most irresponsible state. That itself is a perception of victory, systemic superiority over the other. And you were able to push the last intruder out of your territory, out of your area. And that was, your definition of victory then has to be within what you can achieve in the given set of limitations and circumstances that have been imposed. The classical victory in a total war context is passé. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have a question from Mayank, and I will not put this question because it says IW and technology go hand in hand. It's technology driven and akin to digital media manipulation. Are we not really lagging behind? I think it's work in progress, and let's leave it at that. We cannot go into the details of discussing our capability and capacities at this stage. We have certain people who are dealing with this right on this platform. The lot is being done, but yes, it's a work in progress. We have to catch up on this. We have to create capabilities. We have to create information war structures, and definitely it's a work in progress. We also have another question on Kashmir. We'll skip that also. I'll just go to the last question. I really cannot take out time. I'm running out of time. I'm sure you'll listen. It says, it is evident an anonymous group dismantled the Islamic State cyber divisions at various occasions. In a situation where nations are not sufficiently equipped with robust cyber deterrence, the anonymous group hired covertly would be an option to combat cyber terrorism. General Israel, can I request you to take this on? You're the expert on this. Thank you much.
Can you repeat the question? I didn't.
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. It says the anonymous group dismantled the Islamic State's cyber division on various occasions. The Islamic State put up a cyber division and then it was dismantled in an attack by some anonymous groups. And in a situation where nations are not sufficiently equipped with robust cyber deterrence, does anonymous group deterrence, cyber deterrence.
Cyber what?
Deterrence. Yeah, right. Does anonymous group hired covertly would be an option to combat cyber terrorism? It's a question of combating cyber terrorism. So, could you hire anonymous groups to combat cyber terrorism? It's a very interesting thought process. A very interesting question.
Well, there is one misconception about deterrence. Let me start with it, and this is that deterrence should be done by the same means. For example, you want to deter someone to start a nuclear war, you cannot deter him by threatening. You use your conventional forces. You have to threaten him by nuclear reaction. It doesn't hold for cyber. I mean, if I want to deter someone not to attack me in the cyber space, it doesn't mean I have to limit my reaction or my actions to cyber domain. It will be, many times it will be a mistake. The best way to deter terrorists, for example, is not to play with them in the cyber domain. Playing with them in the cyber domain will be for their benefit. I can use many other things like brutal force, real force, bombs, etc. I can catch them. I can do a lot of things to deter them, and not necessarily if I'm speaking about terrorism. If you speak about states, it's more complicated. But if you speak about terrorism, usually they will not be deterred by a kind of counter cyber operations. This will not be effective. They may be deterred. It's very difficult, as we all know, to deter ideological groups, and many terrorists have different ideologies. They may be deterred by more acute, more powerful means, not necessarily cyber limited.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. I think you summed it up. Deterrence has to be in all domains and not necessarily the cyber domain. Thank you very much. I think we have exceeded our time. I need to thank the panelists. Thank you very much indeed. You've taken time off to be here, despite the time zone variation out there. Dr. David Otto, Professor General Israel, General Bakshi, thank you very much. I will now hand over for the second session to General Satish Dua. All yours, General Dua.